Thank you very much. Great to be here. So my talk is about how to integrate nature-based solutions and digital infrastructure in making cities more resilient and fair. So with the climate changing and cities expanding, there's increasing environmental stress and also increasing social inequity. And one way to address this is by using nature within cities, so nature-based solutions. And technologies such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things can be used to help plan, monitor, and improve those systems. So things like green roofs, green walls, green spaces, permeable pavements to manage stormwater flow, and the use of AI and remote sensing to model and map the ideal locations of these natural infrastructure. So these tools are becoming increasingly powerful. There's a whole field of data science and techniques that can be used to model entire cities and nature within them. So habitat, water flow, shade, temperature. So these can be applied to assess the degree to which these green spaces and other natural infrastructure are effective in achieving both ecological goals and also supporting social goals. So it's important that any technology that's rolled out has not only benefits for biodiversity and habitat, but also social benefits and addresses equity. So one of the ways in which that can be done is through applying ethical principles in AI. So things like opt-out, transparency into how algorithms are used and training models are developed. So it requires a framework. So a number of planning models have emerged that have a focus on nature and technology and AI, and also social equity, so that it considers all three. And that way you don't end up with solutions that are unidimensional. There's a number of examples of where AI and other technologies are used. So, for example, in Turkey, a model was looked at all of the parks and determined that 75% of them were not in optimal situations, locations, and then made recommendations for where they could be better placed. So another thing is remote sensing and the Internet of Things. So an example of that is in Chicago, where there's an array of Internet of Things devices across the city that monitor things like air quality, and that's all published in near real time. That is in a public dashboard that they then be used by scientists and planners and individual people to understand and respond to changes in the air quality. Digital twins is also an emerging technology. And an example there is Singapore, that has mapped the entire city with all of its buildings and roads and waterways. And it enables planners to map and anticipate the changes that might occur in terms of flooding or shading. There's a number of models that can be used. One example is in a city in Seoul. There's nearly a 6 kilometre area was an above-ground highway, and they completely transformed it into a natural area, and they were able to map the changes in biodiversity and the temperature. So they found that there was a 6 times fold increase in biodiversity, and the temperature dropped by 5 degrees Celsius. Multi-objective optimisation is key here, so that it's not focused on any single outcome. And so AI and machine learning enable you to look at many different variables simultaneously and anticipate what outcomes there might be. It's also used in predicting and anticipating flooding. So there's Gaussian models. China used this. They found by using these models, their accuracy of predicting flood events based on things like precipitation, the surface area, that the accuracy of predicting floods increased by 90%. So this translates into lives saved, and if you can get a fair warning of upcoming floods just based on these variables, automatic alerts can be sent out. It also enables you to predict demand. So based on historical usage and rainfall patterns, you can increase the predictability of water usage. The key is to integrate ecological understanding, social science, and technological innovation. And by doing that, when data scientists, ecologists, social scientists, policy planners and community members work together, we're going to be able to build cities that are more resilient and fairer. There's a number of ethical considerations with AI that many of you would have heard discussions around, things like the tendency for bias. There are governance principles such as transparency and having, for example, in Amsterdam, there's a registry of all algorithms that are used by the city. And so this increases the trust in the use of these systems. So explainability, AI is like a black box. Even the developers of them often don't know how they get the answers. And so this is a question that's being grappled with, because only when you can really understand how these solutions are proposed can you then have confidence in them and understand that there were, ethical principles entailed. There is a lot of investment increasing in nature-based solutions. So a recent UN assessment found there was over $250 billion per year being invested into nature-based solutions, although that's still only half of what's required in order for us to meet our climate and biodiversity goals. Interestingly, only around 20% of that is from private sources. So there's a capacity for the private sector to increase their contribution. EcoLaunch I set up is an accelerator for ventures focused on nature-based solutions, NatureTech, and it's over 35 weeks, there's 27 masterclasses, and I've assembled 90 or so global contributing experts, and we run masterclasses with panels, and so that's something that I've introduced as a way of supporting the ecosystem of nature-based ventures. There are a number of important frameworks that city governments can adopt and conform with. So for example, I mean, every country in the world is a signatory of the Convention on Biological Diversity, except for two, the Vatican and the US. But apart from that, the entire world is on board with this. And the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which again, almost every country has signed on to, sets the explicit goal of protecting 30% of all land and sea, restoring 30% of degraded ecosystems by 2030. And we've also got the Sustainable Development Goals, which was a 15-year project to align civilization within planetary boundaries and improve social equity. We're not tracking too well. There's still 5 years to go, but it still remains one of the key policy drivers for cities. And the Paris Agreement guides us to quantify decarbonisation. Another thing that's key is participatory governance. So when you have co-design up front and transparent decision-making around how nature-based solutions are planned and implemented in cities, it gives people a sense of ownership and trust over it, and then those projects are more likely to be supported. So gender responsive and cultural sensitivity is also key. When you design solutions that accommodate for the needs of disadvantaged, the vulnerable, or you end up with better solutions across the board. And Vienna is a good example where for the last decade, they've attended to the needs of women and other groups. The digital divide is a key social equity concern. An example of where this is overcome is in New York City. So the NYC Link has kiosks throughout the city where they offer free broadband, free phone calls and phone charges. And this way, when you make AI-enabled services available to everybody, regardless of their social status, it's more inclusive and fairer. Another thing is having open data and transparent databases. So when cities develop these projects, by having them in the public domain on dashboards available, it generates interest. You can even engage citizens in collecting the data through citizen science initiatives. An example of that is in Melbourne with the urban forest map. And every tree has a unique ID, and you can email a tree. Now, originally, this was designed so that if there was some concern about the tree, it was ill health, or maybe there was a branch that might fall, they could email the city or email the tree. But what happened was that there was a flood of love letters to these trees. Like, people felt a sense of connection with the urban vegetation, and the workers in the city would email back from the tree. And so this builds up a sense of relationship and belonging within the landscape. It requires...
2 minutes left.
Thank you. An interdisciplinary approach. So we need data scientists to work with policymakers and sociologists to everyday citizens to work together to co-design solutions. Because when you have multiple perspectives, you end up with high quality raw data to then make good decisions. there's still a number of research gaps. So for example, a lot of AI models that are trained on information from a single city are not well transferable or generalisable to other cities. And also, because it's an emerging field, there's a lack of longitudinal data. So as these studies continue, we'll end up with more historical data and data that is more generalisable across different environments. So the key is technology is a tool. It's a very powerful and useful tool, but we need to keep it in perspective and focus on what are the goals of the use of that tool in a city. So it comes back to the experience of living in the city and the natural habitats that support life. So it can be used to accelerate green infrastructure, but governance has to ensure that we don't inadvertently exacerbate inequality. So as we start to harmonise the digital infrastructure, the social goals and governance, we'll end up with cities that are more beautiful, safer and cooler, and better for our mental health and habitat for all of the other non-human living things that we live with. I'll skip to the end for time. If you want to scan, you're welcome to connect on LinkedIn. So thank you very much.